Well, everybody, another quarter is in the books for WWE, and we have lots to discuss coming out of a very eventful earnings call that followed all of the reports that were issued by the company on Thursday late afternoon. And that means that we put out the Wrestlenomics signal out into the skies from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and they have reached Brandon Thurston, who returns to Post Wrestling. Brandon, always a pleasure to have you on the show.
I'm here. There's snow falling this morning. As I look out the window here at Wrestlenomics headquarters, I don't see any this morning, but did you have snow this morning in Toronto?
We have not hit snow, although we are right at 0 Celsius. So we are right on the brink, but look at that. You guys getting snow before us here in Canada.
Yeah, just tiny flakes as I was walking the dog this morning. But yeah, it was I had the day off. I think you were saying earlier as I was listening to Post Wrestling earlier this week. These are bigger than the pay-per-views, aren't they? There's better stories and they're just more fun.
These are the real quarterly specials, and what we always say as the default in pro wrestling, and I know you've been a big proponent of it, is the creation and elevation of new stars. And we had 2 of them on the earnings call. This was the big debut after the press release in lieu of vignettes building up to Kristina Salen and Nick Khan having their first real public introduction to the WWE stock analysts on this call. And we can actually start there. I mean, this was, a serious focus of the call was kind of presenting this new executive management team. And I cannot recall too many times that Vince McMahon was near emotional at the beginning of this call by describing like the camaraderie and joy that these people have brought to this executive branch. Like I envisioned like George Barrios like sobbing somewhere as he heard this, but this was like very much like the new regime that was on display on this earnings call.
Yeah, I hope there's a Netflix scripted series someday that just the docu-series that reenacts today's or yesterday's call. And there's a scene of George Barrios sitting alone somewhere in Connecticut listening to the call. But yeah, I think so. Nick Khan is the new president and chief revenue officer for WWE. I think Vince is just in love with him. He's got such a deep voice and he knows what he's talking about. He's a man. He's an alpha. But he was very impressive on this call, and I think it was a clear contrast from. I mean, we only listened to him talk for less than an hour. But it was very different feel from the feel that I got when I listened to all those calls with George Barrios and sometimes Michelle Wilson would talk. Nick Khan feels like somebody who has a lot more direct experience dealing with the media rights negotiations that have become so important to WWE's financial picture and are only going to be more important for the foreseeable future. As you mentioned, Kristina Salen is the new chief financial officer. And I think I had maybe expected her presence on the call to be a bigger deal. I think I was just overestimating, look at how big a deal George Barrios was in the executive picture of WWE. And he was basically in the CFO role. And now Salen is replacing him. But she appears to have more of a minor role. And after all, she didn't get the president title. Mm-hmm. Nick Khan has got the president title. And speaking of elevating stars, I think Stephanie McMahon was elevated to an extent that she's never been at on one of these earnings calls. She was, I was surprised when Senior Vice President Michael White, he always does the introduction and reads the forward-looking statements and tells you who's about to speak on the call. And it's always going to be, Vince McMahon and George or Vince McMahon and George and Michelle. And he introduced Vince, Nick Khan, Kristina Salen, and Stephanie McMahon. Stephanie went on her spiel as chief brand officer. But I think it, now with the new management team, it sounds like, at least from the public view, that maybe Stephanie's going to have an even greater role here as she becomes, the next McMahon in line, I guess. But yeah, overall, I think Nick Khan's very impressive. And I think, it sounds like he's got a good grip on the media business, on the sports media business. And as I said, it's going to be super important to WWE going forward as they try to deal new TV deals. And as we'll probably get into, as he tries to deal some of the WWE Network content, probably the pay-per-views, off the network and onto a major streaming player, which is something that's been talked about for basically the entirety of 2020 to this point.
I guess the headline coming out of the earnings report is that they posted revenue of over $221 million, net income topping $48 million, which a new record replacing the previous quarter. So, I mean, this has been an enormous year for the company. And I think that's where, revenue, I think people kind of saw like, they knew that the escalators were in place for these television contracts. Expenses are, less at this point, given the structure of their tapings and such. But, in terms of the profit for the quarter, what was your takeaway at, a really impressive figure coming out of, Thursday?
Yeah, it was way over my expectations, and it was even way over the expectations of even the highest analyst estimate. So I have an E-Trade account, and I can go in and like look up quotes for WWE, and I can get some analyst reports, not real analyst reports, but sort of a condensed, aggregated version of like, here's what the average analyst is estimating. Here's what the high analyst estimate is. Here's what the low is. Mm-hmm. I was on par with the lowest analyst estimate. The high analyst estimate was something like 56 cents EPS, and I think they ended up reporting about 58. So anyway, even the most optimistic stock analyst who looked at WWE and tried to make an estimate of what they were going to report, they reported even above that. So the net income, as you mentioned, is now at $118 million for the first 9 months of 2020. And when we talk about profit, there's a number of different metrics that WWE reports for profit. They like to talk about adjusted OIBDA, which is a weird sort of made up profit metric. But net income, I think you sort of think about it like your net take home pay, after the taxes and things like that, things of that nature are taken out. They're already at $118 million. That's more than they have ever made, even when you adjust it for inflation back in the Attitude Era. In the Attitude Era, in terms of like 2020 US dollars, they made, $84, $86 million in those peak years. They're now at $118 million. That's breaking the record of 2018 with only 9 months. Now it sounds like Q4 is going to be less profitable. My read on the things that Salen said, she said there's going to be something like $40 to $46 million of incremental added expenses related to, employees coming off of furlough and related to the Thunderdome and the Capitol Center. And I'm really confused about the operating expenses. I expected, so the reason why I estimated so low is because I was figuring that the Thunderdome looks expensive and I could see them really investing a lot of money to try to get their ratings back on track. Mm-hmm. And I've looked at the 10Q, which is the big quarterly report in the SEC filings. And I can't, like, the operating expenses are lower in Q3 than they were in Q2. And in Q2, they were in the entirety of the quarter. All the Raw and SmackDown tapings were at the Performance Center. In Q3, about 45%, a little bit less than half of the Raw and SmackDown tapings were at Amway Center in the Thunderdome. And yet operating expenses are lower in Q3 than Q2. So I have no idea how to make sense of that. But anyway, that resulted in a more profitable Q3 than the Q2 that they had. But yeah, so I think in Q4, they're going to be quite a bit less profitable. But it sounds like it's still going to be a positive quarter. So they're probably only going to add a little bit to the profits that they have. It really speaks to how much the wrestling business, as far as a business model, has changed. We think back to, when we talk about the Hall of Fame votes and what we're going to do and who drove ticket sales and things like that. The wrestling business decades ago used to be a business that you went on TV and you cut promos and shot angles so that people would buy tickets. And that's where you got the majority of your revenue was from tickets. Maybe there was some merch. But you certainly weren't getting a lot of money from being on TV. When pay-per-view arrived, then I think, media, as we talk about it today, media started to get monetized more. Pay-per-view became a big business from the late 80s onward. But it's really exploded now to where the flagship programming, the thing that used to promote the ticket sales or the pay-per-view buys, that has become by far the biggest piece of revenue. So even in a year where the pandemic has wiped out all ticket sales for WWE, has wiped out whatever venue merch they were making there, this company is having its most profitable year ever at a time when, after March 13th, there hasn't been a single ticket sold.
And that just brings about like so many questions to like the future of how you operate what's been just, traditional aspects of the business. And I think live events is certainly one of those that, I mean, prior to the pandemic was one we were discussing about the longevity of this particular pillar of the company. And you look at this and you can go into this about, like merchandise sales during this pandemic. I don't know if anyone could have predicted that, but it certainly brings about, like, at the very least, there is no race to go back to your traditional house shows, even when you have the go ahead to be able to travel again.
No, I think it's a subject that there could be a lot of debate about. There's a lot of hidden value in having people wrestle a lot, even if it's, superficially a loss. I think we've, as I, try to dig in deep and learn about what the expenses are, the revenues of wrestling and of WWE in this case are relatively easy to figure out. What's harder to figure out are the expenses. And what I'm learning is that to run a TV show, like a WWE TV show, with the production quality that they have is extremely expensive. So when we've talked about, in prior years, how say take last year, their live events division, would have been a money loser if not for WrestleMania, right? WrestleMania is this gigantic event with high ticket prices and a huge audience, live audience. And that makes a lot of money, right? They draw about $15 million at the live gate for WrestleMania. But in quarters outside of WrestleMania, each quarter, the live event division lost money. And I don't know if that's due to house shows or it depending on how they're doing the accounting, if that's just due to the massive expense associated with doing the sort of live production, the TV production that they do for Raw and SmackDown and for pay-per-views. But I forget what your original question was. But that it's extremely expensive to do these TV shows, and there's hidden value, right, in house shows in terms of having wrestlers. I think it's something that AEW kind of faces, is that they're only running these sort of weekly TV tapings, and how do you develop talent, especially if you don't have a developmental system, but how do you develop talent without giving them a lot of opportunities to get the reps in? I don't think it's a question that people often ask me when we talk about this. Are house shows just going to go away in the future? Well, but they sell all this merchandise revenue. They do sell merchandise revenue, but I don't think I've done the math at times, and it doesn't seem to be like, well, they lose money on house shows, but it really gets made up by all the merch money that they sell. I'm not so impressed with the venue merch revenue that I think it's worth it. But on the other hand, if you're running a house show, what I was saying earlier about how expensive it is to run a Raw or a pay-per-view with the gigantic production values, if you've been to a house show, the production values on house shows are much lower. They just sort of have like this WWE logo set, and that's where the wrestlers walk out from. They're not doing the massive LED screens and the giant Titantron or whatever, right? So, of course, those production values on house shows are much lower. How much lower, though, I don't know. So, my point is, I don't know if taking away house shows I don't know to what degree that would actually make WWE more profitable.
Yeah, and I mean, you've talked about it before, like the hidden value of, number one, it's getting experience for your talent. It's also going to markets that you're not going to bring a massive television taping to. Yeah. There's certainly, I think, definitely value to it. I guess you just look at where is this company viewing itself post-pandemic, of the idea of developing its talent in overseas markets where they're hoping to have like these satellite groups, that's your development. And then it's more so we're running a television production. That is their core business, as opposed to a live touring business of the way the business was run previously. I guess that's where you look at some of these numbers and they just look at, hey, is the wear and tear we're saving on our talent versus, younger talent that should be out there, like what are the benefits? What are the restrictions that we have to having our talent going to 4 cities in 4 nights, as opposed to they just focus on our 2 big television shows for Raw and SmackDown?
Yeah, it seems like a bit much. Like I would have to know like the more detail than we ever get about what are house shows costing on average, what are TVs costing on average, to really figure out how much of a savings it would be. They know. But I think what we'll get in the future, I could see maybe North American house shows being diminished or almost completely going away, but probably the international tours staying roughly what they are. Or maybe we would even get more of what was talked about on this call, of sort of these localized, specialized shows. They want to do a show in India in partnership with their TV partner in India, Sony. And it sounds like they want to include a lot of Indian talent. And I was sort of asking around, how many Indian wrestlers do they even have under contract right now? And it's like maybe like 6 or 7. I think they've got Jinder Mahal, what's the tag team? The Singh brothers. Kavita Devi. And there's
they do have Sanjay Dutt under contract, just not as a performer.
Right. And who's Malcolm with now?
Right. That was with the tag team. Mm-hmm.
The tag team. That's
the tag team that has disappeared from television. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I don't know. India is a big market for them. It is their number 2 TV market now. I believe it's decisively more valuable as a TV contract than whatever's going on in the UK. And there's a ton of people in India. I mean, they tried a few years ago, as we remember, with Jinder Mahal and making him champion just before a couple of India shows, live events that they had, which they had to cancel one. So I don't know. It's something worth trying, but I think what you need to have to get hot in the India market is to have, a big star who is a big star, who maybe is of Indian descent, but is, not just a big star to one localized market, but is a big star, in general. And, the people who, it's like when, if you, when Trish Stratus goes to Toronto, for example, it's a big deal because she's a big star in general, and she happens to be from Toronto, rather than just being sort of a special localized star for one market. But we'll see.
The tag team that I don't want to slight, Indus Sure, that people are screaming that I'm sure are missing. This was the team that featured the participant who was on Instagram and leaked out the double championship win by Keith Lee back in the summer.
I see.
That is my strongest memory of the tag team's run. So much to discuss here. A lot of it was, and I think that Nick Khan certainly had some strong responses, was that during the Q&A, I mean, much like last quarter, a lot of the questions pertain to television viewership. And, we have seen numbers stabilize with the advent of the Thunderdome, but more so than that, it was somewhat, looking at, hey, television ratings are one measure, as Vince McMahon stated, and they stated that this world is going in the streaming direction. We're very much ready for that, and reintroducing the talks that they had teased earlier this year about licensing content from the WWE Network. How did you think they handled the questions about television ratings, and did you think that they were satisfying answers for analysts that are, looking at those drops and getting some context to them?
Yeah. Well, going in, I figured this was going to be an easier call with respect to the ratings discussion than last time. Last time was late July, and ratings were really going down for Raw and SmackDown. And there were some tough questions that I think where people were raising issues about, why are Raw and SmackDown down, but NXT and AEW are doing better. And I think that phenomena that we saw over the summer was reflective of a real trend in fan behavior. Since then, the Thunderdome has been around, and that's helped stabilize ratings. Roman Reigns, who's the biggest star in WWE at this point.
Yep.
John Cena's gone. Roman Reigns came back. That's helped, at least in SmackDown's case. But Raw has been doing well also, despite Monday Night Football coming back, and as I said, unprecedented sports competition being on TV. Vince McMahon said something to the effect of, we've TV ratings are what they are, but it is what it is. But that's just one measure. You can't just hang your hat on TV ratings when, look at other things like, their online consumption, And I think he really sort of shows how he's kind of out of his element, and he starts to talk about social media and things of that nature. But he said something to the effect of, we've got more fans than ever now, actually, even though ratings are down. And I think that's just BS. I think you look at the annual trends of things like ticket sales and merchandise revenue, and the behavior that we saw with network subscribers over 2019, where in every quarter it was down from the comparison of the prior year. It is back up now, and they did do well in network subscribers in Q3, better than I thought they would. But I look at things like Google Web Search and just look at that on how in a worldwide basis, in a US basis, that's just going down lower and lower. I was tweeting, I think earlier this week, a comparison of look at the Google Web Search trends for WWE and compare that to the NFL, the NHL, the NBA, boxing, all these other sports where it's either pretty stable or flat or it's growing. And in the case of WWE, over the course of, say, since 2016, it's just a down to the right trend. So I think all those things combined, even though, yeah, absolutely, and Nick Khan sort of laid it out in a fairly smart way. Yes, people are consuming video in a different way. People are trending away from consuming video on linear TV, on their pay TV cable, or over the air, TV systems, and they're consuming it more through their whatever other screens they've got, their phone, their tablet, the computer. And I think that tells us that the value of live content is not going to go away. And I think the future value of WWE's live programming, like Raw and SmackDown and the pay-per-views, is going to remain stable, even though people are gravitating away from consuming it on live TV, and we see that the ratings going down. But I think you can make the comparisons about look at the trends of NXT throughout this year, and look at the trends of AEW Dynamite throughout this year, and compare that to Raw and SmackDown, even though Raw and SmackDown absolutely are viewed about twice as much as those two programs. They have not suffered, NXT and AEW have not suffered in the way that Raw and SmackDown have. Even though Raw and SmackDown have stabilized, they have not recovered yet to the point where they're having a better growth story, or as good of a growth story, or holding up story as NXT and AEW have. I don't think it's legitimately deniable that the popularity of WWE, the popularity of the main roster brands, has diminished over the last few years, including this year.
When we look back at those, huge deals signed in 2018, it seemed that, timing was really with WWE, that just, they had all their ducks in a row. You had, just the addition of a Ronda Rousey that I think played a factor in there, at least in terms of, getting the ball rolling and such. As you look at the timing several years down the road, when these deals are up in 2024, and you're looking at the landscape of streaming platforms and increasing, leverage when it comes to alternative options beyond linear television, what's your forecast about WWE's timing? That it seems that, several years from now, we could see, a major, sports franchise that latches on to a Netflix or an Amazon, or as the FAANGS, as was pointed out, our new acronym to add to the bingo card.
The FAANGS, which stands for, let's see, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google.
Yes.
Those are the five big tech companies. I guess you're asking about.
I guess
right
as
now,
you just look, if, several years from now, it just there's no way to really, answer concretely, but timing wise, it just seems I'd be pretty confident if I'm WWE of where the, a potential bidding war and driving up your price could be 3 years from now, as opposed to if your rights were up this moment.
Yeah, it's something that was speculated, I think, especially for the India deal that came up. That was just finally sort of completed in Q2 of this year. There was some discussion from some firms like Lightshed that maybe because look, Facebook made a bid on cricket in India. Maybe that's a sign of what's happening in India, or a sign of things that are to come in the U.S. market. Facebook never, maybe Facebook showed some interest in WWE. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Anyway, WWE didn't get a massive increase in India. They got a 1.8x increase in India. Compare that to the 3.6x increase that they got in the US because they had Nick Khan come in and help them split off Raw and SmackDown rights, taking Raw, dealing Raw to the USA Network and then dealing away SmackDown off of the USA Network and onto Fox. And that resulted in a big increase because they were able to deal with two partners rather than just selling it all in bulk, I guess, to one. I guess the thought is like, these negotiations are going to come up they're probably going to be getting dealt in early 2023. There may be talks before that. The schedule that we've learned over previous patterns here, previous negotiation cycles is that the timing should end up where a deal gets done about the middle of 2023. Mm-hmm. And that's where the big Wrestlenomics WrestleMania is going to happen. Because AEW will be involved probably around that time too. So AEW's deal with Warner Media expires at the end of 2023, but Warner Media has an option to renew them and extend them for an additional year. If things go the way that they are currently going, it seems like they have a good relationship and that they would renew that deal or pick up the option for an additional year rather than having to renegotiate or let them go somewhere else. I don't think they would want to do that if things are the way that they are now. So that could end up with AEW Dynamite being dealt at the same time that Raw and SmackDown are being dealt. And depending on what the viewership is like at that time, it's early 2023, that could be, I think that could be not good for WWE if, say, P18 to 49 or even P18 to 34 for AEW Dynamite is very comparable to Raw and SmackDown. I guess the argument that I can make if I was negotiating a deal for Raw and SmackDown, if AEW is very comparable to Raw and SmackDown, I could say, well, you're not the only wrestling product out here that's doing numbers like you are. There's another product out here. So it's not this unique special value that I can't get anywhere else if AEW does exist. I think AEW is due for an increase of multiples if things continue to play out the way that they are in terms of the viewership trends. But I think even in that environment, where say you got AEW Dynamite doing a very comparable young viewership demographic relative to Raw and SmackDown, I still think the live content value for Raw and SmackDown still stays pretty strong, especially if they're still as highly ranked as they are. I've been trying to digest a lot of sort of wider scope information about where does Raw and SmackDown lie compared to all the other TV, in the US TV ecosystem. We all know, yes, TV is down overall, and sure it is. But where really is Raw and SmackDown? And I did a lot of copying and pasting from ShowBuzzDaily.com, and I looked at all the TV data going back to the beginning of the year. And even though, as we know in the history of these programs, the history of Raw is a down and to the right line. The history of SmackDown is a little more complicated because they've been all over these different networks that have improved their viewership. But if you sort of took that out, yeah, SmackDown would probably be down to the right too. But Raw is still, we consider that Raw is a year-round program, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe it takes 1 week off a year for the holidays, but otherwise it is a 52 weeks a year program. And so the things that beat Raw are just other sports, just other major sports like college football and pro football and the NBA. There really isn't another program on really any night of the week that you could say that it does the sort of key demo viewership that Raw does or that SmackDown does, and does it year round. And for these networks that pay, as we know, huge contracts, $265 million a year on average for Raw, $205 million a year on average for SmackDown. I think that comes out to something like $5 million per episode, roughly. Yeah. So that's a ton of money, but that's still cheaper than it would cost networks to replace Raw and SmackDown, and they might not get the same viewership, and they probably wouldn't. I mean, if you're doing a scripted series, you're not going to get that 52 weeks a year with new first-run content. So while Raw is 3 hours a week and it's a slog to watch, and I think it's detrimental to their popularity, it's still filling 3 hours. That's like 3 TV series, first run, year round, for 52 weeks a year for the USA Network. But anyway, so I think that the value of Raw and SmackDown, even though the creative is really bad sometimes, and even though the popularity is diminishing, I don't see the popularity of WWE getting so diminished that these TV shows start falling out of like the top. They're in the top 5. Raw is in the top 5 on average. I don't see it dropping well below that. I don't see it dropping out of like the top 7 or the top 8 or certainly the top 10. So as long as it stays in that sort of top 10, top 5 territory on its night, I think these cable networks really need this content that will drive the cable subscribers to continue to demand that, my God, I've got to have the USA Network. The TV network economy has really changed over the last few decades. I think that the cable systems, the cable networks used to be more of an advertising platform. So think about like AVOD, think about like YouTube. Nobody's paying a subscription. If you're going to YouTube.com, you're not doing YouTube TV. You're just watching ads and you're watching video. I think that's more along the lines of what the USA Network, for example, or TNT used to be. But now USA Network and TNT and all these other cable networks, including Fox, even though you can get it over the air, they're charging the cable systems like here it's Spectrum or Comcast itself as a cable system, or DirecTV or Dish Network. They're USA Network and TNT and ESPN are charging those cable and satellite systems transmission fees more than ever to carry those networks to the point where it's like 80% transmission fees and only 20% advertising revenue. So as much as we talk about how important the key demo is, which it is, and it tells us a lot about what the future of TV viewership is going to be like, and a lot about what the ad rates might be. These TV networks are kind of subscription services, even though you have to buy them in a bundle still. So anyway, there's a lot of money to be had for this live content that keeps the networks as strong as they are and as sort of like must have as they are. So I think live content is going to continue to be a strong value for WWE in the future. Whether or not, I think it's finally getting to your question here, whether or not the FAANGS, the big tech companies, are going to get involved in live streaming. Maybe by 2023, I don't know. Maybe. I sort of think about like what are the companies that might do it? I don't see Netflix doing anything live, right? I think Amazon is doing something with the NFL. I think there's something to the idea of like, well, maybe we start to deal live linear TV rights over here, and we deal digital live rights over here. Mm-hmm. I think this is something I should probably read up more about, but Twitter has some sort of rights to the NFL, I think, and Amazon has some sort of rights to the NFL. So I think that's sort of maybe that's just a separate media deal that gets made. They have exclusive rights to this pipeline, and they have exclusive rights to the traditional TV pipeline, and that's how you even monetize even more. I mean, who knows? There's so what others are there? There's Facebook. We saw WWE sort of experiments with Facebook with the Mixed Match Challenge. That lasted 2 seasons. That didn't seem to go that well. I don't know that Facebook is going to make a huge play for sports, but who knows? I mean, Nick Khan made the point that he thinks that, judging by the hiring that these big tech companies are making, that indicates to him that they want to get into the competition for live content. So maybe that will happen. Got Apple. There's Apple TV. Are they going to do something live? I'm not aware of anything that they're doing live. I think the way that Netflix is, I have given this some thought. I think the way Netflix is now in something like 60 or 70 million homes in the U.S. And that's almost as many homes as have cable. It's about 80 million homes, maybe less than that by now, that have cable. So how many, maybe the value for Netflix, if they were to actually do live TV, is to have some sort of higher premium tier that you can only get the live sports content on. But, see, the idea is like, well, if we pay, $1 billion for a live, sports property, how many more subscribers is that going to get us? Unless we put it on a higher tier where people are paying a premium for it. when they're already in, almost, all the households maybe that they're going to be in. Maybe they're almost saturated at this point. Yeah. Does Netflix and Google, Google has YouTube TV, I guess. I don't know. I guess YouTube could do something, but, 3 years is a long time away and we'll see what happens. But I think it's sort of it's concerned more for these media distribution companies, whether it's NBC Universal or Fox or ESPN or Warner Media or the FAANGS. That's a concern that they'll figure out and they'll sort out, and the consumers will have to deal with whatever they sort out for them. But the content creators like WWE or AEW I think that's less of they have fewer decisions to make, right? They just have to make the deals. And I think they're ultimately going to be the beneficiary of, TV rights fees that continue to increase in value.
You spoke about the WWE Network subs. For the end of the quarter, they were at 1,549,000 paid subs worldwide, average paid of just over 1.6 million. Of course, this is the second quarter where we've gotten to see whatever impact you attribute to the free tier being introduced. And I guess the main item coming out of that sector is the fact that they are resuming talks for licensing content out, but holding short of stating that the network itself would be for sale. But they seem to be opening their doors to license content out again. And this was a deal that, you can recap from earlier this year, Brandon, where it seemed like they were right near the finish line. Like Vince McMahon was talking about this as though it was a done deal just before the pandemic hit. But it seems that this will now be revisited. And I think probably a very likelihood that given, what we have seen through other streaming platforms, and like there will be a lot of interest in WWE content.
Yeah, the major suitors appear to be, in my estimation, is ESPN Plus and Peacock. We saw in January, Vince McMahon fired George Barris and Michelle Wilson. I think that was largely around a difference in strategy. I think Vince decided, we've done this WWE Network thing for, I guess, 5 years now, 6 years, about 6 years. And I don't think it played out as well as he would have liked. I think they were openly projecting at 1.3 to 4 million subscribers. They got half of that. I think George Barrios may have sort of overprojected a big tech philosophy onto WWE, sort of overemphasizing the value of the data. Although Nick Khan did, sort of reassert that they think data is valuable. I think the value of data of wrestling fans is not as valuable as they would like it to be, or the value of data for people who use Facebook or Google. But so Barrios and Wilson were fired in January, and Vince decided he wanted to take basically the pay-per-views or the content associated with the WWE Network in a different direction. He wanted to sell it to major streaming players like ESPN Plus or Peacock, maybe even Amazon Prime, who knows. And it sounded like in Q1 that he was, this was in February where they had actually their Q4 year-end conference call for 2019. And he's talking like maybe we're going to get a deal done before the end of Q1, before March 31st. And obviously the pandemic started to take effect in the middle of March, and that never materialized. So one of the big reasons why they've hired Nick Khan is because Nick Khan would be somebody who would be well prepared to make deals like that. So I think what we did get clarity on in this call was that they are not looking to sell the network itself, which is kind of what I saw as the smart thing to do. I think there's still a UFC Fight Pass type model for WWE to do, where I think there are hundreds of thousands of subscribers who will continue to hold on to their subscription, even if there's no pay-per-view access on it. I think there are hundreds of thousands of people who just want that library, and maybe even they leave the takeovers on there, and that's the takeovers become the leading content on the network. So I think that's something that they may get done, probably not before the end of the year. They didn't want to put a timeline on it, and I think Nick Khan said something to the effect of, we don't want to put a timeline on it right now, but we're in constant contact with all these people. So I don't know. I think the pay-per-views are worth somewhere around $100 million on an average annual basis. but whether the streaming players are ready to figure out how the best. I think that's sort of the big question. I think for the streaming player, if I have a streaming service like ESPN Plus or Peacock, a wrestling pay-per-view is a really unusual piece of content. You know, it's not like The Office where people are going to binge it. It's first of all, it's a live piece of content, but it's a piece of content that's been monetized in all these different ways over the last couple of decades here, where it used to be something that people paid $50, $60 for. Now it's something that people pay for for $10 a month as part of a bundle. So the appropriate way to charge for it isn't altogether clear. Whether it should be on the standard tier or whether it should be a part of some premium tier is not clear. Whether it should be monetized in the way that, just go back to the way that, you know, UFC is doing it, where, you know, you have to have ESPN Plus and you have to then also pay $60 for the program or whatever it is. But WWE has kind of broken the system by charging $10 a month on a monthly fee for that and their entire library and some other stuff. So, yeah, I think that's if there's hesitation from the streaming ecosystem, I think that's maybe what it's about, is that they may be not sure how to offer it to consumers. But I do think one of the things that WWE has to offer, in addition to, yes, we're going to give you the pay-per-views, is that not only are we going to give you this great content, these pay-per-views that a lot of people want to watch, but we're going to give you sort of a marketing value. Because imagine, you know, if pay-per-views end up being exclusively on Peacock, that's going to be plastered all over Raw and SmackDown for all of their viewers and on all of their digital media and social media and all their platforms. So I think there's a lot of value in terms of a marketing value that WWE could argue that they're going to provide to whoever buys their pay-per-views. So there's that too.
And that also gets into, I guess, kind of having, you know, certain geo restrictions on your network for, you know, like here in Canada, that we don't get a Peacock, for instance, of how you kind of broadcast that out on the WWE Network as well. So there's like worldwide component that a deal like that would have.
Right. I guess they could, because I think they've done blockouts in certain regions. I think that's something that the technology of the network could probably handle. If say they dealt pay-per-view rights in the US to Peacock, and Peacock isn't available worldwide, well, we'll still make it available to the people in Canada and other countries. But in the meanwhile, probably looking for, you know, well, if we can't make a pay-per-view rights deal that goes beyond the US, maybe we can make a streaming deal with other streaming players that are available worldwide or in certain regions. Nick Khan basically said something to that effect. Yes, we're looking to deal it domestically, but also globally.
Just a few more minutes with you, Brandon. You've been great here, spending so much time chatting about all of this with us. As we come out of the Q&A, one of the big news items was one of the largest budgets that Netflix has ever put towards a documentary series is going towards a Vince McMahon bio series. And this past year, we got the Undertaker media tour. Can you anticipate a Vince McMahon media tour in anticipation of this documentary series? And where, serious question, obviously Netflix feels this will be a major hook for people. And I mean, if you're looking at wrestling figures that are going to draw that level of attention, you're probably starting with Vince McMahon.
Yeah, I think that is a big, cool show that people are going to be attracted to. It's sort of things that I've like sort of half jokingly said that they should do is, you know, Vince McMahon should retire from creative and just go on, you know, he should hook up with Bruce Pritchard and go on the network, and they should review old pay-per-views. But I think there's like a real value in Vince telling his story, and Vince hasn't told his story a lot. You know, like to his credit, I think he's tried to stay out of the limelight in certain things. Like he won't appear on the Hall of Fame ceremonies, and he appears sometimes as a talking head in their documentaries, right? But he's not overbearing. I think he tries to stay out of the way. And I think maybe there is even some insecurity about, you know, well, he's 75 years old now. He doesn't want to be seen too much. But, no, I think that's a big deal story. And I'm glad that, accuracy and truthfulness notwithstanding, I think that's an exciting, multi-part documentary series that I'll probably watch. And, I hadn't even thought of that if there's going to be a Vince McMahon media tour. I don't know.
I think you got to do, some outlets that you would think are Vince McMahon would be doing some promotion for this in advance of it all. Just given the stature of it, I just think it's notable the fact that Netflix is investing so heavily, and I think it probably tells you that the Undertaker series was well received outside of just the wrestling bubble, and that's probably a series that given when the pandemic hit, that I always thought like that was something that I think if it had come out several months later, you probably would have had some suitors outside of the WWE Network as the first window for that series.
Yeah, maybe. I think Vince McMahon is just a big cultural figure beyond somebody like The Undertaker. I know they did the Andre the Giant series with HBO not that long ago. But Vince McMahon is, I think, first of all, he's a big name in culture relative to a lot of wrestling stars. And I think his story is, he's the one who's been around for all these decades. And his story is sort of like certainly in his view, is an American entrepreneurial story of this guy who came out of a trailer park in North Carolina, and he pulled himself up by his own bootstraps, and he did it himself just by his pure hard work and determination. And but there's a lot of it'll be very interesting to see how certain things are handled. There's so many scandals in the life and business of Vince McMahon that, well,
it's like the series is going to be most noteworthy for what's not in it versus what's in it. I think it's going to be, especially among a wrestling audience, it's going to be certainly a scrutinized documentary, but it's one that's going to have like so much attention attached to it that, I mean, it'll really be a temperature check on what the kind of audience at large beyond just wrestling fans has when it comes to Vince McMahon in whenever this is released.
Yeah. And until you and I are contacted to be talking heads, I will remain skeptical.
You might get the call to be like the narrator, like when Vince is deep in thought, the stream of consciousness, yes. Brandon Thurston, I think, might be called upon. Just in terms of the earnings call, there's so many different directions they could have gone with questions. Was there any like glaring subject that you were somewhat surprised was not brought up?
Not that surprised, but there was no Andrew Yang talk.
Nope.
And I always try to make this distinction, is that there's subjects that are on wrestling fans' minds that are not necessarily on the minds of stock analysts. But I think this is one that does have quite a bit of business relevance. If we're assessing the value of W as a company, and I don't think W is ever going to sell in the life of Vince McMahon. I think I would be surprised if that happened. But if I was trying to assess the value, or if I was trying to buy WWE, one of the things I think is sort of a hidden liability is that they have this outstanding issue between possibly, and I think they are, misclassifying their wrestlers as independent contractors, but treating them like employees. And Andrew Yang has been public criticizing them about that more than once now. The polls don't look good for Donald Trump. So maybe Andrew Yang gets influence come January. Maybe he is or isn't the Secretary of Labor, but maybe he does, as he says, have their phone number. And that could be something that Andrew Yang could sue them about. I think he did say on Talk Is Jericho, right, that he would, that's what he would do. He would investigate them or something. So my point is, if I'm going to buy WWE, I see that their market cap is about $3 billion, and I see that they're making over $100 million in net income in a year. But how much does it really cost to compensate their talent? If I have to, avoid litigation by converting them all to employees. And I think that's, the answer is it's $10 to $20 million a year to convert them from independent contractors to employees. But it's just sort of a hidden liability. It's not something that they couldn't afford, or it's not something that's the difference between profitability and loss, but it's a hidden liability.
And the biggest question of all, where was Laura Martin?
I didn't even think about that.
Big omission.
Yeah.
I mean, for all the time she would come on and congratulate them on a fantastic quarter. Here we have a record and no Laura Martin to hear from. I mean, one of the regulars on these calls. Maybe she's Team Barrios. Maybe this has been a rough transition.
Well, she's been around for the interim Riddick era, but Laura Martin of Needham, not around. But I think Laura Martin's a big deal analyst. She's probably got a lot of other companies that she's covering in addition to WWE. So maybe there was just a bigger bigger earnings call to pay attention to on Thursday afternoon. I don't know.
Well, if they ever move these back to 11 a.m., maybe it's to accommodate Laura Martin. It would be a welcome change back. I'm not a fan of these 5 o'clock calls, Brandon. I don't know about you, but these are a rough time of the day.
It's not going to change. I think this is just normal. This is when most companies do it after the market closes rather than while the market is open, I guess. Probably just, it's better for causing less volatility in trading. Yeah. Sorry to tell you, don't expect it to change anytime soon.
Well, it's just what we have to put up with. As we end off here, the floor is yours, Brandon. I know that you will have a whole extensive rundown on this, but do let our listeners know where they can hear more of your great work and as well the Patreon information as Wrestlenomics has made their big return to Patreon.
Yeah, I'm an entrepreneur too, I guess.
Yes.
So I write stuff at Wrestlenomics.com. I did do one article just the other day that is behind a paywall for the first time, which is an analysis of the quarter-hour breakdown of viewership for NXT and AEW. I put it behind a paywall, not so much because I wanted to monetize it and become rich, but because I did not wish to hear the responses of everyone arguing and feeling that they were affirmed or striking down somebody else's opinion about who's a draw and who's not a draw. But if you are one of the intelligent and trustworthy patrons of Wrestlenomics, which you can become at patreon.com/Wrestlenomics, you can read that article and get some analysis about are there any correlations between quarter hours doing better than they should or not as well as they should and the actual people who are appearing in those 15-minute segments and all the complications that are involved with that. That's an article that's on Wrestlenomics.com and for the patrons and is on the Patreon. So that's my written work, which is on Wrestlenomics.com. I do a podcast that releases every Saturday as part of the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network. You can find that wherever you listen to podcasts. That is free. And I don't know, you can follow me at Wrestlenomics. You can follow me personally on Twitter at Brandon Thurston.
Come for the analysis. It's top rate stuff from Brandon, but the Vince McMahon stream of consciousness that you have done. I told you this. I was driving home listening to this and my 3-year-old was asleep in the back, and I am not like your laugh out loud person when I'm on my own, but my God, it was a tremendous bit of audio from one Brandon Thurston. So I give my highest recommendation to all of the great work that you put out, Brandon. And thank you so much for joining us for one of our quarterly specials here, the real big tentpole events here at Post Wrestling when Brandon Thurston stops by. So thank you as always, Brandon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.